Hi everyone, this is Joni Bradshaw, and I will be facilitating session 12. The article that I will be facilitating is a framework for assessment in multicultural counseling. This article is by Gregor and Ponterado. So, to start, the article talks about what counseling is and the challenges of counseling multicultural clients. Counseling is a very highly complex and interactive process, and it provides mental health services to clients. A challenge of counseling multicultural groups is that oftentimes the attitudes, beliefs, cultures, life experiences, and religion differ between counselor and client. So when counselors are counseling these clients, they need to have an in-depth understanding of the factors that influence the client's experience, perception, and presentation of his or her problems. And they also need to view the client as a member of a cultural group, and they're culturally diverse. What is counseling lacking in today's society? In today's society, multicultural counseling is not keeping pace with the changing population, changing client demographics, and less than adequate state of multicultural training and counseling curricula that relate to diversity issues is something that we need to work on. So in this article, the authors offer two different constructs, worldview and acculturation. Worldview is essentially, in a nutshell, the lens in which people interpret their world. And there are two components to this worldview according to Dana, and the two components are group identity, nature of cultural heritage, and then individual identity or self-concept that form the basis of one's values, beliefs, and language. A counselor must accurately assess the client's worldview to meet the needs of their session. And worldview also relates to gender identity, religious identity, and sexual orientation. All of these things also affect worldview and expectations for the counseling process. So we must acknowledge the multiple identities of the client. Acculturation is the psychological changes that occur in individuals as a result of their interaction with a new culture. So this is how familiar or how assimilated the client is to the Western or American culture. There are scales to assess both worldview and acculturation, and the instruments measuring levels of acculturation are their attitudes will affect their attitude toward Western type mental health services. Let's see. Acculturation is also defined as a multidimensional and psychosocial phenomenon that is reflected in the interaction with a new culture. There are over 50 distinct instruments measuring dimensions or levels of acculturation and racial ethnic identity. So that was interesting to read. And how they feel towards Western mental health services. So according to the authors of this article, they came up with 6 components of worldview and acculturation. And they are 1, the client's level of psychological mindedness, 2, the family's level of psychological mindedness, 3, the client and family's attitudes toward helping and counseling, 4, the client's level of acculturation, and 5, the family's level of acculturation. And then finally 6, the last component is the family's attitude toward acculturation. So we'll delve a little bit deeper into each of these components, and I have a real-life example that these authors interviewed certain clients, and they have real-life examples that counselors can use to help them shape their sessions. So we'll talk about 1 and 2 together because they kind of go together, the client and family's level of psychological mindedness. So first, when we talk about the client's level of psychological mindedness, this is the client's worldview. The client's worldview affects their level of psychological mindedness. And so the client's background might differ from one that is of American culture. So to start, the counselor needs to have a level of or understanding of the cultural frame of reference that this client is referring to. So the example here was using Su Ling, and she was from Taiwan, and she was a 28-year-old woman, and she was battling with depression. And for depression in Western culture, we acknowledge and experience have the symptoms of depression. They vary between Western and Eastern cultures. So in Western culture, we know the symptoms and consequences of depression. We cannot assume, however, that our client is psychologically minded with regard to Western mental health constructs. So the counselor needs to first probe the client's worldview and assess their level of mindedness. This will help framing the problem and determining the appropriate goals for the session. So Su Ling was a woman from Taiwan, as I said, and she was battling with depression after having a miscarriage. Well, in her culture, they do not view depression and loss of appetite and sadness and hopelessness as being a form of depression. So she has never really talked about that in her culture. And her father also died of suicide. And in her culture, his suicide, it was more for saving face. They never got counseling about it. She never talked about it. They didn't properly grieve her father's death. So when she came to the therapeutic process, she first needed to be educated about her psychological constructs, such as depression, and about the emotional fallout of significant life events, those that are medical in nature. So she had to first understand that she was in need of physical and medical support, and as well as how to support her emotional consequences related to that. So what can counselors do to help the client's level of psychological mindedness? Counselors should, and oftentimes do, realize that clients presenting concern is often not what most needs to be worked on. They need to specifically give attention to problems of conceptualization and goal setting, such as in Su Ling's case. She needed her worldviews to be educated, and she needed to be aware of what depression was before they could set goals for her. 2 is the family's level of psychological mindedness, family's ability to conceptualize problems as psychological. And as the client's level of psychological understanding increases, they can inform family members, bring back the information and inform their family. The example that they gave in the article was an Irish family that feeling sorry for themselves was often not that they were not caring or not empathetic, but their worldview did not value psychological or emotional phenomena. So oftentimes in the second construct, there can be conflict within families, especially if a client from a background in which the family does not believe in emotional disturbance or psychological explanations for unhappiness. and they do not believe in the therapeutic process. This could be very conflictual, and the client may not feel that he or she has permission to talk about her pain or to receive help based on how the family feels. 3 is the client's and family's attitudes towards helping and counseling. The attitude of the client and the family towards seeking help, specifically emotional problems and help coming from outside the family. So a lot of cultures, they do not believe in an individual seeking help or talking about family problems, or, as you may have heard, airing one's dirty laundry to somebody else, even a professional outside the family. And the example it gave was an Italian American and Hispanic American families often come from the same viewpoint here. They believe that the family can manage whatever distress an individual is feeling and alleviate it within the family. They don't need to be airing it to other people. So on part of the counselor, they need to do some work prior to the counseling session, and they need to raise the client's comfort level in speaking to somebody outside the family. They often need extra reassurance about confidentiality and about the legitimacy of having an objective listener who can provide help and feedback to them. Counselor also needs to have a high level of sensitivity towards these clients, as they often need time to open up to talk about their issue. 4 and 5 go together. It's the client and family's level of acculturation. 4 is the client's level of acculturation. The more cultured that the client is in American values, the more comfortable they are likely to be in the therapeutic situation. So psychotherapy is mainly white, European, Western in origin. So the more closely that the client fits these demographics, the more comfortable they're going to be with the process. And, the more they deviate from this, then the more, the greater level of distrust they're going to have in the process. An example that the article gave was Akeem and Diane. Diane is an African American woman from Chicago, born in the United States, and Akeem is a 36-year-old black man from Ghana. So they have very different worldviews, one being accultured to the Western American ways and one being far from that. So although seeking counseling was reasonable and comfortable for Diane because she was from the United States, it was entirely foreign and uncomfortable to Akeem, who does not believe in counseling services. So to get their level of acculturation raised, the counselor suggests, having somebody from their background also sit in as a co-counselor to help the client feel more comfortable sharing personal problems. And the 5th construct is the family's level of acculturation, how assimilated one is to the Western or American culture. Family's level of acculturation will influence the client's attitude on the process and often their life choices. And the example here is Indira's example. She did not want the arranged marriage. She's from India. Her parents are from India. And she did not believe in arranged marriage. And she came to the United States and was a teenager in the U.S. She very much so wanted to date people from America and not people outside of her culture. And the parents did not agree with this, which may not serve these children well in the long run. It's very conflictual between parents and children, or the client in this case. 6 is the family's attitude toward acculturation. There may not be a difference between the family's level of